This time on Poll Hub, it is not your imagination. The news for the past couple of months has been dominated by extreme weather, including here in our own Hudson Valley backyard. And while weather and climate are two different things, scientists have proven they're inextricably linked. So we're taking a look at where Americans stand on dealing with climate change and how that has changed over the last 2 decades. And then, hey Google, tell Siri to ask Alexa to play Poll Hub. Okay, that's a rather convoluted way to use a voice assistant, but they have become very common in American homes, and they represent one of the first ways most of us have interacted with artificial intelligence, AI. Big story, right? But is this convenience worth the price? We're going to discuss, and our fun fact is one many women may totally get, and one that many men may be baffled by. Am I a sexist for even saying this? Well, you be the judge when we get to it. Lots to do. Let's get started. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Emily DuPoint.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
So we are here in the Hudson Valley, and we have experienced firsthand, as we noted in the open, climate change in a very dramatic way. There's been a lot of flooding, very heavy rains. Unfortunately, a woman died in the floods just across the river from where we are here in Poughkeepsie. But between the smoke and the giant heat dome over the Southwest where record temperatures are being set, extreme climate events are happening. Climate scientists say they are linked, and 99.99% of climate scientists say it's because of what we have done as humans on this earth. What we wanted to do is look back, and from the time that most Americans first kind of got their thinking about climate change kind of focused on this, which was Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth, that documentary, to now, what has changed? So let's do a couple numbers real quick. In 2006, Pew asked, do you think that the Earth is getting warmer? Majority of Americans said yes. But only 41% thought that it was due to human activity, and a similar 41% thought it was a serious problem. So in 2013, there was a poll by Pew, and they asked Republicans versus Democrats. 50% of Republicans thought that there was solid evidence that the Earth was warming. 88% of Democrats agreed. And when we look at modern polling, we're basically in that same spot. It's become a partisan issue, not whether you think the Earth is warming, but whether you think there's anything that anybody can do about it or whether it's human caused. So, Lee, let's start with you and the politics here. This seems to fit a pattern that is disturbing, at least to me, over the last few years, which is everything is partisan. Everything. Is that where you see this?
Yeah, and I think you start out the debate with some awareness of a problem, and then you immediately go to a differential view on what the cause is, and then you can talk solutions, and the parties split on that. One of the things I thought that was very interesting from 2009 in the polls on whether climate change was a major threat, 61% of Democrats and 25% of Republicans thought it was. By 2022, 13 years later, Democrats had gone from 61% to 78% thinking it was a major threat, where Republicans actually stayed pretty much the same, 25 to 22. So the awareness and the sensitivity to this has also been a partisan undertaking. And I think that, this is part of all we're learning about, that whether science still matters to people. And if I can put on the editorial hat for a second, this is some scientific fact, whether you like it or not. The scientific community is pretty uniform on this, that we as humans are to blame. And the worst thing I ever hear about is, you get a cold spat in the summer and people say, how could you have global warming when it's so cold in July? Or you get a heat wave in December and they say, my God, people are crazy thinking about the climate change. And obviously that doesn't have to do with long-term averages and trends and melting of ice caps and disappearing of glaciers and all the kinds of things that we've been experiencing lately in terms of weather events.
Well, this has really changed over the last, we'll say, 4 decades. And before this became such a partisan issue, it was more of an economic versus the environment issue, because very often the economic development that people would see in their communities would change not only the landscape, but the character of many of the natural resources that they had in those communities. And one of the interesting things is when political scientists like myself studied these, because I actually did my dissertation, my PhD dissertation on perceptions of the environment and economic development and whether those two areas could coexist. People really did feel there was a consensus that they could coexist and there just needed to be responsible economic development. And one of the interesting findings in a lot of that research was that people who lived around areas that that were proposing significant economic development were more likely to support that economic development than the environment. And that sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but especially in communities where some of this was occurring, which were more rural communities, the idea of bringing this economic vibrancy to their community was incredibly attractive, and they were willing to make environmental sacrifices for that. But on the other hand, they still felt that these two things could coexist. I think as we've moved into this partisan division, what's happened is it's not even become an issue of, one thing or the other thing. It's more about which side am I on? And I think that is a much more dangerous and much more concerning problem because we're not finding common ground. And it's not just about climate change. There is consensus on climate change. There's consensus that climate is changing. Why it's changing, there are differences. But we can act and we can develop policy because we do have a consensus as to what is happening. Generally, people do not want drastic changes. So do Americans want us to rid ourselves completely of fossil fuels? No, because infrastructure-wise, we're barely surviving our infrastructure with what we have right now. So the idea of these revolutions of change do divide, not just in terms of partisanship, but divide Americans overall. But I think there's a lot that people feel that they can do. There are many people already doing that. And there's I think, a consensus also that we need to have the big players in on this. We need to have corporate America in on this. We need to have our governments in on this. And the more we have these partisan fights, the less likely we are to do it.
But we also, Barb, there's so many green friendly jobs right now. So along the lines that you're talking about, that we can have both sound environmental policy and economic improvement, I think really it's become very clear in the realities of it.
There's two things that I just heard today, both on NPR while driving in, that relate to this, that both struck me as really interesting. They were interviewing a guy who was not an environmentalist. He's a foreign policy person. And the last question in the interview was, what do you think is going to happen with the world and climate change and dealing with it? And he's a diplomat, and he said it's not going to be diplomacy. He just doesn't see how diplomacy and us talking and trying to get along is going to change it. He said technology. So very much like what you're talking about, right, Lee, is that it's going to be a technological fix. The other thing was this question about, to another person, this was to an environmentalist about a different kind of story. It was about the weather and stuff. And asked, well, what can you do? What can we do as a person? What can our listeners feel like they can do? And the answer was so convoluted. This is from an environmentalist person who knows about this, because I think there isn't a simple answer to that. Can you recycle more plastic? Can you get an EV? There are these simple kind of answers that don't really satisfy and don't add up. And I don't think most people feel like are going to make a difference. And that relates back to what you said, Barb, which is a majority of Americans feel like corporations aren't doing enough. The big players aren't doing enough. And I wonder where the pressure from us as regular people feeling we don't have the power to do anything about it finally is translated into getting the big players who can do something about it to actually do something about it. I don't know. Open question.
Perhaps I'm being optimistic, but that's what I like to do. Also, having lived in the Hudson Valley for quite a long time, which is right next to the Hudson River, which when I was growing up was literally a toxic river. And you didn't swim, you rarely boated because things would be floating by and there were so many chemicals in the water, nobody wanted to be near it. And back in the day, I mean, there were environmentalists, I think they derogatorily called, tree huggers, that basically said that we can do this. And over the last 30 to 40 years, the Hudson River is a very, very different place than it was. So these things can be done. And my optimism also stems from the fact that when we look at the data, there is a very significant generational difference. The younger you are, the more important you feel the environment is. And when we talk about technology, that's where the technology is going to come from. That's where the ideas are going to come from. And there are many people and many companies, startups, and, brick and mortar places that have been, doing fossil fuels for a very long time that have invested in new energy technologies. And I think as we move as a culture and also as a globe to many of those technologies, we will see these kinds of changes. Again, everybody that agrees and wants to save the planet needs to put their energy into making that known. And I think that is certainly one way that people can take action, even if you don't feel that recycling your plastics is going to change the world. I remember Pete Seeger always saying, think global, but act local. And so that's always something that to keep in mind. But probably, the major changes are going to become from technology and just making a difference in how we live. Will it be soon enough? That's the question. And I think that is a worry for many people.
Yeah, I think, and that was the final point I was going to make. I think 1970 was the first Earth Day. I could be wrong. That was over 50 years ago. It's around when Pete Seeger, you mentioned, started fundraising for the Clearwater, which run up and down the Hudson, to try to address this. So we have made a lot of progress in 50 years. But, when I was younger, there was a TV show called Beat the Clock. And I think right now we're up against that in a lot of ways. And the scientists are telling us that we got to step it up.
Let's take a dive into the world of voice assistants. Those nifty devices like Amazon's Alexa, Apple Siri, and Google Assistant that seem to know everything about us. They become such a big part of our lives, haven't they?
Oh my gosh, yes. So many people can't imagine their mornings without asking Alexa about the weather or getting Siri to set reminders for them. I mean, in my household, Alexa has basically become a virtual DJ for my kids' dance parties. I mean, even my 22-month-old is going around saying, Alexa, play Elmo Slide.
Well, when I'm jamming out in the shower, I always ask Alexa to change a song for me, or even if it's just adding stuff to my grocery list.
It's all about that next prompt, right?
Exactly.
But for all the benefit and convenience of these devices, there is a downside. In fact, there's been a lot of buzz lately about the privacy concerns surrounding these voice assistants. It's got people wondering, are our conversations really private?
Well, here is Drew Prindle, Senior Features Editor at Digital Trends, with some insight about the most concerning privacy issues associated with voice assistants, such as Apple Siri and Amazon Alexa.
I mean, I think generally there's kind of this perceived notion from everybody that these devices are like always listening to us. And to a certain extent, that is true, but there's technicalities going on there, basically. That's not to say those fears aren't entirely unfounded. There have been studies that have been done that have shown that these voice assistants are recording us more often than we might think. And some of that information is being sent to the cloud. It's being saved. It's being shared with contractors that work for companies like Amazon and Apple and Google. And so there's kind of just like a loose accountability chain with some of these recordings. I think that's a pretty big one because some of those things are still kind of unaddressed. And there's not really a lot of like insight currently into what some of these big tech companies are doing to fix the problems.
There's also been some recent concern about doorbell cameras. It turns out in some instances, companies have been handing over footage to the police without asking for user consent. Back in 2021, Amazon's Ring faced criticism for providing video footage to law enforcement without owner's permission. Users' videos were accessed by police through partnerships with Amazon's Ring. Since then, users now have the option to share their footage voluntarily.
Like on one side of the spectrum, you've got like Apple, for example, which is like very, very pro user privacy. They have a really strong track record for not sharing user data with outside companies. And then on the other end, you have companies like Amazon, which at one point, I'm pretty certain they had a portal where law enforcement could just request data from Ring doorbells. It kind of depends on the service you're using, but some of them are better with your data and privacy than others.
It comes down to understanding what companies' policies are. Plus, there are other ways consumers can prevent information recorded on voice assistants from being released or even listened to.
You, as a consumer, do have some control over this. You can jump into your settings and make sure that it's not storing your searches at all. But that's not turned on by default. So a lot of people who just kind of blindly opt into these things don't know.
There's little question a knowledge gap exists. According to a recent 2020 Ipsos poll, many people still don't know much about these devices and the privacy risks they pose.
The poll actually revealed that only a quarter of Americans claim to know a lot about voice-controlled speakers, and nearly half admitted to knowing only a little, and a surprising 25% didn't know anything at all. For Prindle, this lack of awareness isn't a surprise and may have to do with the convenience of the technology.
The idea that half of people aren't fully aware of the technical details and it's just kind of like voice Google search that's on in your house whenever you need it to be. Yeah, it's a very simple device to use. It makes sense that you don't really have to know how it works in order to get the benefits of it.
There's also another dimension here. Have you heard about the whole issue with children's privacy and voice assistants?
Yes, and according to a Washington Post article from June, Amazon Alexa devices were collecting and storing recordings of children's voices without their parents' consent. Of course, that raises concerns about a violation of privacy laws and protecting the little ones.
As these AI-powered voice assistants continue to evolve, there will likely be a need to find a balance between the benefits of voice assistants and the preservation of privacy rights, especially for those most vulnerable like our children. But the question is how?
I think we should mandate transparency reports from all of these companies. Personally, I think that, is a pretty low ask, honestly. Just like, hey, show us how you're recording, what you're recording, who you're sharing it with, just being upfront with us. But that's, they're not going to do that on their own. That's going to have to be something that we do from, the government. It has to be legislated.
Makes sense. Hopefully there is something set in place in the future, but who really knows when any laws will be passed to prevent these tech giants from literally knowing everything about us. Prindle seems to be cautiously optimistic.
I tend toward optimism here. There were a bunch of big studies done about this privacy stuff back in like 2020 that showed a lot of leaks in how this data is recorded. And I like to think that the companies addressed them somehow. And, they also are, there have been subsequent iterations, newer generations of these devices that are presumably better. And also every time these assistants supposedly learn every command that they get. So between 2020 and now, they've probably taken in billions of additional commands. They've probably got better at listening. There's probably fewer instances of waking up and listening to you when they shouldn't be. But that's all speculation at this point. Back to the transparency point. We really don't know.
With these AI-powered devices evolving and becoming more powerful, there is more responsibility involved for the consumers. Some countries in Europe have already put laws in place to protect consumers and their privacy rights. So, will America take a stand like Europe? It'll be interesting to watch whether or not American consumers are really paying attention to ensure their private conversations are actually private.
Well, as we move into the fun fact this week, I'm very curious as to the music, Jay, you will pick to underscore something to do with the purchasing of shoes, maybe Walk Don't Run, which used to be a rock and roll. I'm not sure. I'll leave that up.
These boots are made for walking.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Blue suede shoes.
Gotcha. Okay, well, so Princeton Survey Research Associates in 1991 for Lifetime TV did ask Americans how many pairs of shoes they owned, and shoes was broadly defined. You could be sneakers, loafers, cleats, boots. I'm not sure what else, but
Flip-flops.
Yeah, flip-flops, beachwear, whatever. So 1 or 2 pairs, 1%, 3 to 4, 15%. The plurality was 5 to 8 pairs, and that was 29%. Then 23% if you have between 9 and 12. I put myself in that number. I counted, I believe, to 4, and that's what I came up with. And then it starts dropping down, 13 to 16, 10, and over 50 pairs of footwear, 3% of the country. And those are people who just have big closets or they just can't throw anything away. Anyway, I'm in the plurality second group at 9 to 12. But how about it, guys? Jay did say this could be
I think I gotta go.
when you have to go to the shoe store. Those boxes that show up at your house, Barb, from Zappos, does that have anything to do with why you're not talking too much on this segment?
Well, when I find a pair that I really like, I'm always afraid that look, it happens to all of us. You find something that you really like, and sure enough, the next time you go to buy it again, they've changed the style, they've changed the material, they've changed the colors, and it doesn't quite fit the same way. So when I do find something I like, I tend to stock up on them in every color.
So how many pairs of shoes do you have, Barb?
I hate to say it, Jay, but I know I'm a pollster. I don't even think I could estimate that within an error margin.
Oh, stop. It's got to be over 50 then. Are you going to include horse boots with this?
Oh,
They don't
yeah.
count.
I didn't even think of my horse riding gear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I probably get close to a half dozen to double digits just on the horse riding gear.
Okay, so you're a 50 or more. Casey?
And I also don't like to throw them out. I mean, I always think that, as long as they have a solid sole, I'll find some way to use them.
All right.
Jay,
Well, you're in the top 3%, the special 3%.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to you.
Or the lowest 3%, depending on how you look at it.
I will interject. In my household, Nancy does point out that women's shoes don't last as long as men's shoes do. I'm just saying. Jay, what's your count?
I'm like 9 to 12, so I'm where you're at, which is the in kind of second place, whatever. Yeah, 9 to 12. Barb, I am a little bit like you, though. I do have shoes that I really like, that they're pretty close to being worn out, and I really don't wear them anymore, but I always like them. So I do have a couple of pairs like that, but yeah, 9 to 12.
Those aren't your baseball cleats, are they?
No, I don't have those. No.
Emily, student Emily, what you got?
I was talking to Jay about this earlier. I have an insane shoe collection. I like to match every single outfit with a special pair of shoes. And my mom is even worse. She has probably double the amount of what I have. And it's gotten so bad that we have storage in our basement just designated to shoes. So there's a spot for every pair.
So how many do you have?
Definitely over 50.
So we might then change your first name. I'm not sure you'll appreciate this reference, from Emily to Imelda, as in Imelda Marcos, who was known famously for closets fall. Casey Schaff, I'm glad you just smiled at that, Emily. I wouldn't have wanted any other reaction. Casey, what you got?
I'm over 50, but
Wow.
I feel like I need to know the breakdown of men versus women, because I feel as a woman, like, you have situational shoes, like you have inside shoes, outside shoes for home, slippers, sports shoes. Like, you wind up with all these different wardrobe area specific shoes that I have over 50, even though you only see me in my favorites.
So this may be an unfair question based on.
I think it is. I think it is to a certain extent, because think about if you have to go to a formal event. What do men get to wear? They get to wear a black tuxedo and the same shoes they wore every other formal event.
Special shoes with my tux. That's not true. It's not true.
I know, but you don't change. You have special shoes, but you don't change them every single time you go to a formal event. Whereas women need to wear a different dress each time they go, especially if they're, going to be seeing the same people. And that's the social pressure that we have to be different and then, coordinated. So,
yeah, to back up Barb, you literally have to have, for the same dress, you have to have two different pairs of shoes if the event is on grass or not on grass.
Yeah, I'm sure fall, winter, summer matters also. Okay.
I don't know, Casey. I don't know if this actually defends us or not.
I don't know
I
either.
mean, like, if you can't wear a pair of spike heels that go with a dress perfectly to an outdoor wedding, like.
You get the last word on this, lady. Shoes, how many, and where's the argument really going on this?
I would say that I probably have over 30, but I would say a good amount of them is cleats, because I play a college sport. So I'm gifted a free pair of cleats or two over every year. So I think I have quite the collection there going. So I don't think my shoe addiction is as bad as it looked from the outside.
Yeah, good point. But I will point out that you folks who are still undergraduates, if you get into the purchasing side of it, but not the throwing out side, you're still young. These numbers may be way too short when you get to reach my ripe old age. Although your cellar, Emily, sounds like it's already well stocked in every size and style that imaginable. Probably looks like a shoe store. Anyway, that's where it is. And now I'll turn it over to the music ending, which I suspect Jay has picked an appropriate one for.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Athen Hollis, Emily DuPoint, Delaney Hayes, and Eve Fisher.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub,
there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcast app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.
These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.